welcome to the KAVOD Family Podcast. My name is Casey Wilson. We have Travis Shook and a good friend, Cliff Graham, in the studio. How are you guys?
Wonderful. Wonderful. Beautiful day out there today.
Well, two things. For those of you that don't know, Cliff is a good friend of ours. He is also the author of the Lion of War series. Maybe you've heard of that, picked it up in the past. Day of War, Covenant of War, those are two books that are available in print that you can buy. If you hang on just for a bit, you might find them repackaged with another brand, and some very exciting stuff going forward with some books that you've written and some new product. That's so awesome.
Yeah, it's fun.
So anyway, Cliff is with us today, and Cliff has a background and experience with the military, tour guide over in Israel as an author, but he's also had a number of years working with women, and I'll even say there's men trapped in this, right? Mm-hmm. Young boys, those that have been trapped in the sex trafficking industry. Mm-hmm. It's a terrible place. It's a terrible vice. It's a terrible world. And you were a part of a number of different groups, and then you kind of built your own team that went in and helped kind of. I mean, I don't know what the right word is. You said it's not rescue. It's tough to define, right? It's tough to define. I think you. But it was about bringing freedom to these girls. The hope was to bring freedom to these girls,
right,
that were captive.
Yeah, that was the goal. Mm-hmm.
So this is the second part of a two-part series. We're actually talking through the 7 deadly sins, all those vices, and we've been talking about lust. And so Cliff stuck around, and we're able to do a second part. And so this is not just talking about sex trafficking. This is talking about lust at its worst degree. This is the ugliest forms of sexual lust that there are out there. This is not somebody just, to put it in another language, this is not just somebody who smokes a joint here and there. This is a crack house where people are dying. This is as depraved as it gets when it comes to the sex industry.
It's like the perfect merge of lust and pride, where you've ran so far down the trail of lust that you're like, now I'm going to find a way to become profitable and leverage this and ruin everything from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's multiple evils that come together that create this industry, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Cliff, if you don't mind, man, just dive into some of your story. I don't know what you can and can't share, but just jump into that and paint a picture. Because I know that you spent years working through this. Your family, your wife had to sacrifice so you could go in and work in different operations. I mean, can you share some of that with us?
Yeah, so it's a corner of about 5 years of my life maybe that I am no longer anywhere near involved in it. It's been a long time since I ever had any involvement in it. So this is looking back into the past quite a bit. So just to lay that groundwork. If people will look me up right now, I'm involved in none of these organizations or any of that stuff. But for a while there, I was with a few that are known, few organizations that are well known, others that are not. And I was just trying to find an outlet for the calling that I felt was on my life, about telling the stories of heroic men and trying to live out an example and partner with groups and agencies that were doing something like that. So
was this kind of the overflow of your heart as you wrote?
It was,
these,
yeah. At the beginning, very much so.
Okay.
It was very much. It was. I hate the phrase "on brand," but for lack of a better word, it's on brand for helping men step forward into a calling of bettering society, building the family, bettering society, all the stuff that we live by in rhetoric. I was really intrigued by the people that were doing it with the boots on the ground, sacrificial manner. So I just want to spend time around them, honestly, was where it started from. So I went on a few early missions with an organization, and, I learned quickly how much I didn't know and how foolish it is to try to get involved cold turkey without being properly prepped. It was truly a leap into the fire. I did well as far as my skill set gave itself pretty well to working on operations where you had to be, you'd call it undercover. You pretend to be somebody else, and you'd have to infiltrate and do a lot of things in foreign countries in particular. And then it sort of migrated its way stateside, and I got to work with agencies and organizations and individuals that have come out of the trafficking world. And it was a lot of forming partnerships with local law enforcement by being the eyes and ears and the skill sets that they just don't have the resources or time to commit to. When you have a major event going on, like a massive concert, or the Super Bowl is a famous one, but anything where there's a huge gathering of people with a party atmosphere, you're going to find this thread that makes sense. And so it was just over time being more and more involved in pivoting and trying to make a difference while making 10 million mistakes in the process.
So you worked on operations overseas and in the States.
Great, correct.
Okay. And so sex trafficking is a problem that you see everywhere in the world.
Yeah. It is defined. It is the coercion of a person into sexual activity that they are not ultimately in control of, right? That's the most broad definition I can give. It's not sexual slavery per se. It's just being trafficked means that the victim, the person who is on the receiving end of this exploitation, is there against their will ultimately, okay? And so because I'm being careful with my definition, because depending on who you talk to and which group you talk to,
sure, it's all
there's
different.
a lot of rhetoric. Yeah, there's a lot of fight over the rhetoric. I'm just helping the average person grasp it, right?
Depending on the age of the person that goes into this, it may be the only will that they know, right?
Right. And some people will say, where there's disagreement, I won't give my own personal opinion. I don't think it's necessary or appropriate. But some people will say a woman who is a prostitute willingly is also a sex trafficking victim, just like a little girl kidnapped from her bed and chained somewhere is a sex trafficking victim. So there's people that will conflate those two together and put them on total equal ground. And so that's kind of why the point I guess I would make on this whole thing is the enemy, Satan, has successfully muddied those waters to such a degree that we get into the nitpickiness of, is she actually, we're missing the big picture of, hey, this is broken. This is fundamentally broken. Right is a family with thriving husband, wife, and children and a thriving society. Anything not that is not right. It's just degrees of descent into darkness that you have.
Yeah, right? So for you, it's not that sex trafficking was bad, but if you come back a few degrees and this is just about a strip club or pornography or something like that, that's fine. That's healthy for our culture and normal. You're saying, no, this entire industry is off from what God actually has planned for us.
A world that has a woman that dances in a strip club, regardless of the reason, is a broken world, right? That's a broken world. She is broken, and those that have come at her are broken. It's just shattered everywhere you look.
And this is not a modern issue. I mean, you write about this in your books, but we know, just look through history, prostitution, brothels, that has been a part of the fallen world from the very beginning.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was, you think about what the creation order looks like, and it's Adam and Eve, and God creates the union of a man and a woman intimately from the beginning. I just find that fascinating. Before all of the other narrative starts to unfold, we get this beautiful picture of Adam and Eve and union and oneness before God, which implies mental union, spiritual union, physical union. All that stuff is harmony and union, right? So what do we see nowadays at every level? Is the enemy going all the way back to that point and trying to break it? You're not actually a man. You're actually a woman. I mean, you're starting to see brokenness from that, because everyone can kind of agree, all right, child sexual slavery, unless you're a bad person, is a bad thing. Like, everyone can agree conceptually. But where you see cultural confusion is where does the right come in? What does right look like? Yeah. And that's what that standard being lost is where the confusion comes from, right?
Yeah, so this is not just an industry that has got it wrong when it comes to sex. We're talking about labor and money and how to make money. That's also wrong. This is a bad form of that. We're talking the manipulation of marriage and family, what the role of a man and a woman are, and how that it affects everything. Yeah. Right? Yeah. It's a complete corruption of the way that men and women were meant to live and exist, to create a living, to create a job, to create a family. All of that is off.
Yeah, it is. And so in my involvement in those years was discovering with vivid metaphorical potential, I'll put it that way, that is real. There's a real enemy out there. Evil is genuine. And even when you mean well getting involved in it, you can fall into traps, and your own sin and your own flesh patterns can betray you. I mean, it is such a dark, murky world that even to this day, if people hear that I had a background in that for a while, they ask me, well, who's a good organization? I don't even know how to answer that question anymore, because it's so hard to tell. I know the mistakes that I made. I know the problems that I had. I also know that that's endemic to a lot of other groups trying to do the same work, because the nature of it is just so dark and nasty. It's not as simple as rescue girl, put her in program, she's okay again. It is I just pray for and think about frequently the ones that are involved in that knee-deep level of relationship and laboring and toiling, human by human, victim by victim, because they call them survivors once they come out of the life, but I have to refer to a victim at first because that's what they are at the time, right? That's what they are going through that. Then coming out of it, they become survivors. That word's an important piece of branding, which is really beautiful, I think. It's an important piece of branding for someone that comes out of that lifestyle. They're known as a survivor. And then those survivors are the only hope in an earthly sense. They're the only hope for more victims to become survivors, because it has to be someone who speaks their language and goes through with it. It can't be commando-minded guys like, let's kick a door down and rescue people. It's truly serving the ones who have been in there before and helping them the best that you can.
Yeah.
Certainly what it is.
Exactly what Christ did. You know, he met them right where they were and loved them out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So what can you share with us about some of the operations that you were on? Can you flesh out anything there?
Yeah, I mean, I could talk some of the types of operations maybe where you would pose as buyers, you would pose as bad people in different parts of these countries that had an extreme amount of underage prostitution and underage escorts and models and things like that. And then, stateside, it was a lot of the big events where you have strip clubs and bars and any kind of party atmosphere is where probably the most obvious version of this is where there's a lot of celebrating and partying going on. So, yeah, I got to be a part of teams, got to participate in missions, and then I had myself a team that I formed that had some experience in the background for it. And we did missions together. And then we had a training program that lasted for a while where we were equipping people that came through that if they wanted to get involved in their community with their church or with a missions agency, they had some type of basic skill set to take with them.
Sure.
Emergency medicine, how to operate in a dangerous environment, a lot of that kind of thing. And we would teach them that stuff.
And this all came about because the governments that are in place and the law enforcement that is in place cannot initiate that relationship. They can't be the ones that just step in and start the rescuing of those that are trapped.
Yeah, it's simply the case that there's not enough resources and time allocated. My data is very old, but I remember the city of Denver, I think it was probably about 10 years ago. I never worked there and I was never involved there, but I was listening to a buddy talk about working there. They only had, I think, 3 detectives in the entire city that could focus or concentrate on trafficking problems as part of their overall law enforcement portfolio. Now, that's a big city with a lot of crime, and 3 people giving 60 hours a week. you're not going to even scratch the surface. So what I think where these ministries that have been successful and organizations that have been successful find that success is they look for a lane to run in between law enforcement and its power and its authority and its legitimacy and the willing heart of the average person trying to make a difference. So they bridge that gap effectively. A lot of times the police are very eager and willing to help. They just need good intelligence to go off of. A granny calling and saying, I suspect there's something next door. They're obligated to follow up as they're able, but trained eyes, particularly like a lot of former law enforcement people that know what they're looking at, that then communicates with that law enforcement department. You get a lot of vigilantes, like that does happen, and because of that, there's a bad name for some of this effort. It is because there's been chaos and disaster that's happened as well. But there are effective people who know what they're looking at, know how to fight it, and then they can give good tips to law enforcement and say, this is a ring, that's the person in charge, here's the ones affected. And then they just kind of hand it over on a silver platter. And if they truly want to stay effective, that's the last they have to do with it. They don't have any kind of further, other than that was a really quality tip that was just given. So in the field, I saw that be the most effective way from a justice perspective to try to help out. And then that's where the intelligence comes from, people who are experienced, but those survivors that are willing to be brave and go into those bars and go into those clubs.
The knowledge and the eye for all
Oh, man,
that,
they can look around a room and tell you right away, that girl right there, that girl right there. I mean, they can just tell you because they were there themselves. But, boy, it takes a toll on their soul. It really does.
To have to go back and face that.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So there's two things I want to ask. One, I want to know the difference between the faith-based Christian organizations that you worked with, because I know this isn't just a Christian group effort, right? There's many people that look at this and say this is an evil and a vice that we should all fight against. No matter what faith or background you come from, there's groups that are saying that, right? You were even telling me stories that some of the drug lords overseas were the ones that were most helpful to be able to get.
Yeah.
I mean, that's incredible, right?
Yeah.
And then I also want to know just the impact it had on your family, your wife, because you were married at the time when you were taking some of these operations. And so jump into either one of those. I don't care which one you want to pick up.
No, that's great. Yeah. So faith-based and secular, I think the main difference between well-meaning groups, about 10 years ago, this was extremely culturally in the zeitgeist. You saw a lot more of it. I think it's still out there, but it was much more so in the last decade. It's like it flared up in its awareness because I think Ashton Kutcher, a lot of the Hollywood crowd started promoting it, talking about it, that social justice mentality was getting going. And this is one of those ones, like, we can all agree, child sex slavery is horrible. I mean, who's going to chime in on a Facebook forum and be like, actually, I think that's a good thing? I mean, no one's going to do that. So whatever racial problems we have, I mean, everyone's going to fight tooth and nail over that. This issue was always one that people tended to go, okay, yeah, we can all agree that's bad. So in that raising of awareness, you probably had secular-minded folks who thought changing the circumstances of a victim into survivor is the answer, and that's the totality of the answer. They change their circumstances. There's a quote-unquote rescue defined by they're no longer in that life. And now, because they have a better set of circumstances, they are able to be cured. The problem's over, right? The faith-based groups, the ones that had the integrity and that I just learned from the most were the ones that recognized there's 100% a logistical problem. If someone breaks into Travis's house tonight and tries to threaten his daughter, Travis is going to enact violence on behalf of his daughter and eliminate that threat, right? So there's always the room for justice and action, always that room. It leads with that. But the faith-based component has what happens to the soul of this person that is they're supposed to just pick up their life and move on? I mean, what happened in there? And then more critically, how do we prevent them from ever wanting to go back to it? Because that's the evil of the hook that has been placed in them, is that if there's not effective aftercare that I just believe is faith Christ-centered in its capacity to redeem even the most broken of souls, they're going to get that lure bringing them back in because, listen, it's just true that there's a lot of money and there's a lot of ease. A lot of these women in particular, they never make the money again that they made doing that in that lifestyle. So, okay, now they're faced with real poverty. The people that were heroic trying to help them have disappeared, and they're just on their own again.
Right.
Where else are they going to go? So I think having empathy for that journey is important, because what else are they supposed to do?
That is so immensely complex, on not only having the resources and the men with the goal to go do it, right, and to fight and to stand in the gap, but also on the back end of it to make sure that they're loved and discipled and not just thrown on the streets in a slightly safer environment, but like, how do they do life? That's discipleship. That's a lot.
So what were some of the things that the aftercare, because this is where maybe we can start to put some application for homes, how do people locally get involved or help out, or what can they do to prepare themselves for it? What did you see the groups do really well that helped restore or bring life back to a young person that was trapped in that and actually got set free? The girls that were fighting again, what gave them the confidence and the security and the ability to be able to go back and fight that?
The word family, I circled that in my notes here. You asked me about how the toll that took on my family. It was the wrong I'm a weird witness in this category because I'm coming from a I should never have gotten involved standpoint. Really, I'm glad that the Lord brought me through that experience. I learned things, but I should not have gotten involved in the state that I was in at that time. I think I entered it very blindly, and I made a lot of mistakes. And my wife very faithfully perceived after a few years, I had a couple of just crash and burn moments. I was really had let a lot of people down and was just making mistakes. And she looked at me and said, I think you're drifting away from your calling. You're drifting away. I know your heart. She was very clear. She was affirming. I know your heart. I know you mean well here. But with a lot of other areas of my life at that point in the journey, she could perceive that I had meant well and I intended well, but I had drifted and was making more and more foolish diversions away from what my core calling was. So for me to have to recognize that, listen to her voice and course correct, that was critical. Now, my family during those times, that was one of the things that got me out of it was I recognized that this particular work you have to be called to, and I have no business being here as a married father, that this is not my calling. Like if we're just called to be missionaries in Haiti, hey, that's the game, right? Then that's the risk assessment. But I was doing work that I was not called to do. And I was observing people who were called to do it, and God's favor was on them and not on me. And so I like to be here and go, okay, I can now testify on their behalf and say, I know what I saw and I was involved in things, but thank God I'm not still doing it, because people lovingly told me, one guy in particular, you shouldn't be doing this. I mean, they were really called me on it. You shouldn't be doing this. And, man, that was really sobering. And so my kids were just young enough to not really know I was gone a lot. My wife knew. She was proud of me. She was proud of the work that we put into it. But it's making sure that for those listening that have a swelling heart of, I want to get involved in helping fight this problem, really with a great sober mind and a methodical approach of prayer and seeking advice, be careful before you do that. Writing a check to a good organization is an amazing place to just be and stay there. To go another level of involvement is really violent if you're not careful.
And the biggest thing that I'm speaking from someone that has never been in it is to be a son of God, to be a good father, to be a good father or uncle or just man in a daughter's life. Like the amount of girls and teenage girls that come in here into the gym, at the very beginning, God was like, you need to set the precedence that you are either a second dad, a big brother, that there's safety here, that there's comfort here, that there's encouragement there. And when they come in and they got a new boyfriend, I'm like, they're meeting all the staff. They're meeting everybody. They're meeting all the guys in here, and they're like, oh, my gosh. But he's like, you're going to be a good example of what they should have, what they should aspire to, and not to settle. So the man at home, if you want to involve, do that in your neighborhood. Do that for your daughter and your wife. Do that for any woman you see in a grocery store. Like, be the man that God called you to be. And this ripple effect, it goes everywhere.
The family, you're right, exactly right, Travis. I think, so Casey, to answer that original question, my family and how it affected them, a Christ-centered family environment is the only possible, I think, earthly way that we can see real healing start to emerge, because it has to be Christ-centered, because everything has to be Christ-centered, or it's just fundamentally a flawed model, right? That's controversial. So there's a lot of anti-trafficking groups that will send up a signal flare, like this faith-based thing has caused so much trouble because if they're bringing Jesus and not help. I mean, you see that happening, right? But a loving, warm, safe, family-oriented environment, which many of these girls have never known, that existing in stability and comfort and also challenge. The best, most effective thing I ever heard one of these survivors talk about was, this is me quoting her, not me with my own wisdom here. She said, I couldn't be allowed to stay in a victim mentality. Not even these victim of victims. I mean, there's victims and then there's victims, right? There's real victims. And this woman, incredibly brave, she just said, I can't stay in the victim mentality or I will never overcome anything. So yeah, the idea of being an overcomer, you're seeing that word emerge more and more now in our Christian culture. And that's such a good word to get to, because overcoming in Christ and then providing that community and that feel that she's just not known, so that when the seduction of that former life comes in, because again, guys, it's not that they were all kidnapped into it.
Sure.
It still has a seduction to them, because from the broken place that they were exploited in, just like any other old wound you have, it's gonna lure you back in if you're not careful. To prevent her from getting there, that aftercare part where it is a Christ-centered family environment of a really good church and a community. But to me, it transcends the church. It's like things like the gym, like this KAVOD gym, phenomenal community, and it's a gym, for crying out loud. I mean, it's just throw weight around and get in, but it's got phenomenal Christ-centered community, and you guys are throwing weight around and sweating. You know, that's what you're doing. But I love the idea of Christ taking dominion over every one of these corners and saying, no, I will be glorified in a community like that, where you wouldn't, it's not Bible study time, it's lifting weights, and I will be glorified there, and my people will feel safe there.
Yeah, you start to look at this whole thing, and you realize the value of relationships. It's one of those linchpins. If you remove the relationships, you can't expect a person to fully recover, to heal, to grow. Even when it comes to the finance thing, you say it's a pickle because if they come out of this industry, they'll never make that kind of money again. Well, if they come out of it, they're probably going to need education and skills before they can make a good living.
Right.
Yeah.
And until they get that, they're going to need a covering, somebody that can pay the bills and step in and love. And so you start to realize that family really is God's prescription, right? It's his plan to restore so many things.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you can, I mean, even if you can just make yourself available and dream, my wife and I going through the foster care program, going through adoption, going through that, hearing what's out there, knowing some of the backstories of what's going on, you start to see that the practical needs really are families becoming great godly families, stable and able. And even if it's just a hurting brother or a hurting sister that's in need of a covering for a season, to be able to make a space in your home, your family, where they can be a part of it, right? And they can go through daily rhythms of life with you and begin to grow, grow to get to the point where they can thrive.
Yeah, and it's just, I think that's the answer. That's the answer. And then what challenges the answer and what always creeps in is the enemy efforts and the failures of our flesh to mean well, because this is what he takes advantage of, is your intent can be really good, and he always just puts you slightly off course. It's like in the Pilgrim's Progress when Christian and Faithful, they end up in Doubting Castle being flogged by giant despair, not because they just jumped off the road and ran across the field, but because there was another path that opened up just to the right of the way, right? And then as they go down that journey, it's just a little easier to walk on this one, and we're still walking in the same direction. We're still going there, and pretty soon they've diverged enough to where, bam, here comes doubt and despair, slamming them around and locking them away and throwing the key off. And so that's what happens, I think, with going down this road. For people that feel, I think like anything else, people that feel called and are affirmed in that calling by God to get actively involved in this, it's clear and unmistakable. And you count the cost, and it's sober-minded, and it's going to cost you something. The ones that just feel their heart broken and think, oh, something should be done about it, that's wonderful, because that's how God's people rally, right? But it is careful to, you have to be careful to keep those two things separate.
Count the cost, yeah.
Count the cost. And just to get back to the subject matter of where I think we were with the podcast series, what does this have to do with lust and pornography? I think at the end of the day, those pornography sites and I love capitalism. I'm a capitalist, but the capitalists behind it that are trying to make money, the flesh is the commodity. That's what they're trying to make. So how they get it is irrelevant to them, really. I mean, they're going to say things when they testify to Congress. And,
Sure.
But it's like
the most profit.
Yeah, the banality of evil. It's what they call the Nazis. Like the Nazis would be really heartbroken over a dog getting run over in the street, but they thought nothing of gassing 1 million Jews. Like the banality of it to them, like they're just flesh merchants. And in a world where we have removed the divine from human flesh, I guess they're not wrong. I mean, if you're an atheist, you should look at flesh as the law of the jungle, like everything else should. There's no inherent value to anyone. So why not take advantage of the weaker to make money on them? Yeah. So the people of God are the only ones that plant the flag and scream into the wind going, hey, inherent value in that woman over there, inherent value in that little boy.
Yeah.
We're the ones that should be the most ferocious in our resistance to the exploitation. So pornography for the average man, I think the average man knows it's out there enough that a lot of pornography is rooted in this, but that is the end of that journey. Ultimately, is when you've given yourself so far over into to lust, and you've rebelled against God so far that you start to see this deep wickedness of enslavement. Does that make sense?
Well, let's bring this to a close, and the way I want to do it is, while we were on pause, while you guys ran out for lunch and a few other things, I got to talk with you and your wife outside, and you have a couple of teenagers in the home, right? How old are you? The range of your children?
So they range from 17 to 13.
Okay, so you've begun and gone through, those lessons about lust and pornography and life and sex with your children. You're in the vein of that, right?
Right, yeah.
My kids are on the front end of that. They're younger, and I asked you, I said, so when did you begin the conversation? When did you start talking to your children about lust, about sex, about those things? And your wife said, immediately. We did it first.
Yeah.
We didn't wait for culture to tell our children what this was. We told them what it was, right? So flesh that out, because I think this might be one of the biggest helps that we can just encourage families, for mothers, for fathers listening, to give them the courage to start the conversation and not wait for these things to take place.
That's a great question. Thanks for asking. I am unfathomably blessed in the marriage partner that I have. I mean, she has been God's mercy on me for sure. And one of the things that she is so good at is keeping the open communication between the kids and us open. I mean, she keeps it open. She's a nagging mother in that way. Yeah. Right. And here's the thing. She has never cared 3 seconds about being the cool mom. And our kids are better for it, because from the early age, and we had this philosophy together, because I remember how I grew up, and it wasn't my parents' fault. It was just the traditions of the church, where you don't talk about this stuff that much. On your wedding night, you'll know. I mean, that's kind of what you. So in this case, she said, no, we're going to have, from a biology perspective first, because it's only sin that taints this stuff. That's all it is. It's just sin. Yeah. The biology is designed by God, and he said that it was good. So we're going to teach the biology of it as soon as they can comprehend an immune system. As soon as they can comprehend a circulatory system, reproductive system is going to be taught at that same time, because they don't know that that's icky and bad yet. They don't know. They just know that it's a system. The awkwardness and the weirdness eventually comes because of the nature of what it is, but you were the first person to plant in their head what that was, instead of somebody else. From the moment your kids are born, you're in a race with the world to put ideas in their head. One of you is going to get there first. The world is going to get there, or you're going to get there. You're not going to win every one of these things. They eventually, of course, have to go out into the world. But those early years are precious training time to say, when you can control their environment effectively. Our kids, from a young age, they were introduced to the systems of reproduction. And then as time went along, when we brought it up again in more adult contexts, they weren't like, well, and there wasn't that the mystique around it, the shadow around it that eventually kind of creeps in, right? So now, does that mean that they're all going to be perfect angels all the time with this? No, but I do know that we have open, honest conversations easily in our home with this, and that's my wife's doing, because she has been persistent in making sure that there is no dark seduction behind the whole thing. She's just been open and obvious with them.
She set the narrative and not let the world set it.
It's a great way of putting it. Yep.
That's pretty good. All right. Well, if you've listened to this and enjoyed it, please like it, subscribe, send it to a friend. It is our aim. The branding of all this is KAVOD Family Ministries. KAVOD, that's a word. It's not ours. That's a word that God gave to mankind. He gave it to us to help us understand the weight, the magnitude, the glory, the worth of something. And for us, foremost, that is in Christ. He is the way, the truth, and the life. He is the one that we're meant to follow after. He's the one that decides what is right and what is wrong, what is good, what is evil. He is the one that tells us how to live and how to live rightly. And so we chase him. So when you see that branding KAVOD, we are truly trying our best with every effort and with his grace to chase after a life that would be honorable to Christ. That's our aim. And so even with this, as we talk through it, we believe that the restoration of sex, the restoration of lust, the restoration of these things is possible, but they are meant to take place in Christ. And so if you're trapped in one of these sins, one of these vices, if they torment you and follow after you in your life, just know that this is one of those things that is in the darkness, and Christ has come to take you, not just your emotions, but to take you, entirely you, out of the domain of darkness and transfer you into the kingdom of the beloved Son. And when you get to live in the light, we get to take these things that the world says, you can't talk about it, you can't mention it, you can't discuss it, and we get to put it on the table in the light and discuss it. And so that's the way we want to live life. That's where freedom is. That's where health and safety and happiness is. That's where true joy is. And so trust in Him. So anyway, thanks for following. Enjoy your day.